Hey guys, Andrew here. Have been a while since I did video. Did one of these videos about Capture One. Life's been a little crazy. I've had some moves. Been driving forth back across the country. Things are kind of settling down a little bit now, so I'm hoping to get back in the swing of it. Recently went out to Yosemite for the very first time, which is as good as you have heard it is. It's pretty amazing. It's busy, but it's amazing. But while out there, I got some photos, of course, landscapes. And here's one that I'm going to show you how to edit. I think it's a good illustration of how you can use local adjustments in Capture One to accomplish a whole lot of stuff. So when I look at this image, it's a little bit flat. It's kind of an overcast day, but what drew my attention to take the picture was a little bit of light right on the face of Half Dome. So if I do an auto adjust and I play with the midpoint, maybe crank the saturation a little bit, right? I can kind of get that. Okay, it's okay. I can do some shadow recovery. Not really crazy about what that does though. So this is an image that I like parts of it, but it's going to take a little bit of local adjustment to get it really right. So before we start that, I want to start by doing making a plan. That's really where I start. I have an idea of what I want to accomplish, because if you just start messing around, you're probably not going to get to anywhere that good. So if I look at this image, I'm going to use the annotations to kind of mark what I want to do. The face of Half Dome, I would like to be a little bit higher contrast, and I'll probably do the entire face. All right, so we're gonna edit that and make the contrast pop, make the saturation pop a little bit more, really highlight that last little kiss of sunlight that came through. It wasn't super intense. I don't even think it was direct. I think it was bouncing off a cloud and it just happened to be coming through a cut in the valley just perfectly. Okay, I'm gonna try to make the clouds pop a little bit more. We've got, some reasonably good texture up there, but there wasn't a lot of contrast from light. Again, the sun was mostly down. It was mostly just what was there. But the biggest thing about this image is this sort of area up here with these two pine trees, which is my foreground that I was trying to use to balance out Half Dome. It's really dark and really kind of orange green instead of being a better green color. It's kind of dingy and yellow. But if I fix that, then everything else gets too blue. So anyways, that's where we're going to start. So we have kind of three areas we're probably going to tackle. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that now. I'm not going to mess too much with my base settings. I'm just going to kind of get the histogram sort of on centered up here. So we've got, a black point and a white point. You can turn on your exposure warnings to get an idea of what those are. I'm not too worried about having some pixels that are full white, or not full white, but close to full white in the sky or on the snow for sure, because I'm going to be doing local adjustments in those areas. Okay. Now I'm going to go to my local adjustment tool tab, and if you don't have a local adjustment tool tab, that's because Capture One has gotten rid of it, because they've gone to this idea that you have the local adjustment layers tool panel on every single tool tab, which I find, frankly, a waste of space and annoying. I'd much rather have a dedicated tab. So I actually have my workspace saved from Capture One 10, 11 when it was there. But the great thing about Capture One is you can always right-click on this toolbar up here and say, Add Tool Tab, Custom Tool Tab, and create your own. So it just has the things you want on it. I think they may even have the little local brush available as an icon in here, or they've got a little trowel, which could kind of be local, little layers. So you could build one if you don't see it. If you don't want to do that, you're just going to go to your histogram, your color tab, etc., and the layers will be at the top here. You can see on my color tab, I still have the layers up here on the top. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn exposure warnings off, create a blank layer, help myself out a year from now when I come back and look at this image again. We're going to call this Half Dome. And the idea here is I want to name stuff so that, even half an hour from now, I'm not confused about what each layer is doing. Because once you have more than one or two, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3 isn't helpful. Okay, and we're going to start by roughing in the mask on here. If you right click or option click, or you can click on this little button here, you get the options for the brush. I have auto mask on. I'm 100% opaque, 100% flow. I've got my hardness turned all the way down, and my size is just kind of set to what feels right for the image. I'm going to press M to see what I'm doing. You can see there, after I let go, it kind of clears it up. And I'm not being fussy here. I'm just kind of getting it close. I'm kind of trying to put it on everything that's got light on it, or that logically makes sense to sort of be connected to that. You can see the auto masking does a better job in some spots than others. So we've got some problems here. We've got some problems here. Now there's a couple ways I could clean that up. I could go use my erase brush, and I could sort of iteratively get closer and closer to the edge I want. So let me show you that right here. But you see that tends to create some artifacts as well. Auto mask is by no means perfect. And one of the main problems with it is it creates kind of these awkward, sharp edges like that. So I will do that sometimes, especially if it's kind of a rough mask that's too far out to refine there. But you can see right there, I've got artifacts down here. See that little blotchy spot right there? So once I've got it roughed in, I'm going to come up here to the layer in my layer tool panel, and I'm going to right click or control click on a Mac if you don't have a second button, and get refine mask, okay? Which for whatever reason always pops up on a different monitor that I'm working on. Don't know what they've done there. Now, if I put this at 0, it's essentially doing nothing. And this is not a complicated refine like Affinity or Photoshop would be. It's really just telling it a radius to search, and then it's going to make the mask try to snap to edges, but also not be obvious when you do adjustments. So it does a really good job of making a mask that isn't obvious when you apply adjustments to it. So I'm just going to increase the radius, and this is basically the search radius. And a lot of times in my first pass, I'll tell it the maximum radius, 300. Okay. If we look at what that did, you can see it kind of bleeds out here into the trees a little bit, and it bleeds down into some of these rocks. So maybe that's what we want, maybe it's not, but we'll start there. So I'm going to hit M to turn that mask off. Increase my exposure on half dome a little bit. Increase my contrast, drop the exposure down. So instead of doing it that way, I'm going to play with my white point, play with my black point, play with my midpoint, and we can increase the saturation. You know, don't do that, but I can bring it up a little bit. And you can see a lot of the areas there. I'm getting a highlight warning on at least one channel, so I'll back highlights off just a little bit. And this is a season to taste thing. Okay, so at this point what I like to do is I like to kind of zoom in and see if there's any obvious, like, the mask spilling over is really showing up obviously. Another technique for changing the way this looks is to just change the white balance locally. The reason I normally don't do white balance locally is it's really easy to make an edit that's really obvious, but in this case it seems to be working pretty well. So I'm just going to zoom in and scroll around the picture, around the mask area. You can see right there it looks like it's maybe showing up a little bit, but I'm not sure anybody would notice that if they didn't know there was a mask there. But I can take my erase mask and just kind of go over this area. Okay, so we created some artifacts now because we did that. So what we're going to do is refine mask again. And we're going to take our radius way down this time. 15 pixels. So it's only searching 15 pixels from where the spots you are. You can see there's no red on the trees now down here where I cleaned it up. And that mask is pretty good on that back edge. Now up here I didn't clean it up. And I could, but I don't know that it really matters in this case. So for now, we're going to leave that alone. We might come back and do more on it. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to edit the sky. So create a new blank layer. And in this case, I'm going to start with a linear gradient. One of the nice things in the last couple of versions of Capture One is that the gradient is now vectorized by default. So you get sort of a tool you can re-edit, which means you can grab these points and adjust things. Okay, so I'm going to make a really obvious edit. I'm going to make my exposure like -1 and change my white balance really obviously. Now, the catch here, right, is I'm bleeding onto half dome. So how do I fix that? Well, I can right click and I can say rasterize mask. And now if I look at it, I've got a pixel mask, which I can take my erase brush and just real quickly, that was not a spot, I didn't want to go off on the mountain, so let's do that again. So Command Z will undo brush strokes. Just like when I created the mask on half dome, I'm being super just quick here. I'm just sort of splotchily deleting off of it. And you can see that auto masking leaves some pretty obvious artifacts. You'll get a nice halo right there if you leave that like it is. Okay, so let's just start there. So now I can go to sky and I can do refine mask again. Okay, and because I've got some pretty big defects, I'm going to do a pretty big search radius. And you can see it tightened up that mask along this top edge. Now it blended over onto the snow because the snow's very similar to the sky. It's white. It was kind of white gray. But that doesn't really bother me. So we're going to kind of accept that. And now let's start playing with the sky and see if we can make it a little more dramatic. So what I want to kind of do here is I want to up final line where it looks like the sun is shining on this cloud up here. That may be too much. Okay, so we'll go with that for now. One of the things I'll tend to do is I tend to iterate. This may be too extreme. It may not be extreme enough. But there's a start, so I've got that roughed in. So now let's go ahead and add yet another layer, and let's call it lower right. Okay. So far the shapes we've been masking have been fairly simple. You know, half dome's this kind of blobby shape. The sky is kind of a blobby shape. There's not a lot of fine detail. Now we're going to do pine trees. So we're going to follow pretty much the exact same procedure. I'm just going to take my brush, turn on mask visibility, and I'm just going to kind of paint it on down here. Not being super fussy about it. And I'm going to do these trees two different ways. I'm going to do one just kind of blobby. And I know from experience which one of these works better, but they both work reasonably well. And then this tree, I'm going to be kind of fussy with it. And I'm going to try to keep it just on the tree. Even though I'm not being perfect, I'm at least getting close. One thing I like to do is I like to let go every so often, because if I have to undo it, it undoes the entire previous stroke. So we want to not have that be the entire tree if it was really fiddly. We want to have it be one branch of the tree. It will slow things down just a little bit because occasionally it has to process to catch up. See a lag behind right there while it was calculating the auto mask on the other section I drew. The bigger the section you do is, the more of a lag you'll have before the next one starts. Okay, now the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up the edge of this cliff right here a little bit, just so it's not quite so egregiously bled over into the actual valley. And again, I'm still not being fussy. Okay, that's enough. We're gonna end up doing a bunch more work anyways, either way. So, in case you haven't figured it out yet, the next step for me is refine mask. So let's see how close we can get it, or how close the computer can get it. Now, because of how blobby the mask was in this other tree, if I do a small radius, it's not going to do a very good job. So what I tend to find is that doing a fairly big radius the first go around does a good job. And you can see on the tree I spent a little more time on, it's actually doing a reasonable job on that tree already. Whether it's worth your time to do that is a different story. So I'm just going to kind of take my erase brush and go around this tree just to kind of clean up the haloing that created. And again, I'm still not being fussy. I'm still not spending a ton of time. I'm just trying to clean up any of that sort of red, because what we don't want is a halo when we're done. Now on this tree, it did a reasonable job of staying out of the sort of crevices. There's some red there, but it's not egregious. So let's just be really fussy with this one and just kind of clean this up. Okay, that should be enough to illustrate it. I'm going to clean this one up just a little bit. And this time, because I was starting out closer, I'm not going to do quite as big a radius. In fact, I'm going to do a much smaller radius. Okay, so you can see the one that I started off closer did a much better job. So sometimes on things like this, it's a little bit better to spend the time kind of drawing over them. But this left-hand tree got there pretty quick. So now the trick is, can I make adjustments that don't have terrible halos? And kind of one of the issues I have in these is they got really dark. And you can see they're starting to halo a little bit. So we're going to have to go back and clean that up. But also the color temperature got a little bit weird, so I'm going to push that back so they're a little bit less yellow, more green. Now, in this case, you can see where the mask is. So this is a difficult mask if you didn't guess that to start with. So what we're going to do now is we're going to spend some time not necessarily looking at the mask view, but we're going to come in with the brush, and you can see as I run that delete right there, it's adding some artifacts. And what's kind of giving this away is around the outside edge, and these kind of holes peeking through end up being way too bright when I brighten that area up almost a full stop. You can see it lagging behind me as it tries to do the auto masking on these areas that have a lot of sticks and twigs in them. Well, see, I wasn't careful. That area is over something that should be adjusted. So let's go ahead and put that back. That's easy to do. So once I've kind of done that little fiddly bit, which it's by no means done, but that's at least a start, I will take the big brush, a big erase brush, and just kind of go around the outside. My goal here is to get any bleeds that have come out. Okay. And let's refine it again. So there's also something else going on here, and I need to fix this right-hand tree, but before I do that, so I've got this kind of patch of green down here, doesn't want to be that bright. So that means I need to separate these two areas out again. I need to separate the trees from this, and I can use one layer for all of it and then just do the trees, or one layer for all of it and just do the brush, or one layer for each part. Because the trees are really fiddly to create, my instinct is actually to add another adjustment layer just on this green down here, because I don't have to mess with this. But I also point out that you can copy the mask from one layer to another, and then you can modify it. So I could, for example, copy this whole mask once the trees are done, get the trees perfect or as close to perfect as I need them, and then just copy that mask to another layer, and then erase out the parts of it I don't want. So you can do it either way. There's really either way works. So what I'm going to do in this case, I'm just going to create one, and I'm going to call it really lower right. So this one is not even going to be auto mask. I'm just going to make the brush big and soft. It's literally just these bushes down here, this bush down here. And I'm going to run a refine. Probably don't need it on this one, but it will potentially make it less obvious. Okay. So one way to check for artifacts is just to crank like your exposure all the way up. And I'm not worried about the actual tree itself, but you can see this one kind of has this halo around it. So that's no good. We got to fix that. You can also see that inside of this other tree where we've spent a little time, we've still got some halos and stuff. So you can't just, it's very hard to make a mask where you can crank something 4 stops in one spot and not another. It looks really obvious because it wasn't that way in the photo. So I usually refrain from doing that. But we can certainly make this mask a little better. And I'm actually going to turn off auto mask to speed up the process, and it's not actually helping me in this point because I'm kind of being so gross with where I put these that it's not really doing much. Just trying to catch all the spots where I can see the valley behind these. And my hope is that this will provide kind of a seed when I do refine, that it will recognize that that's not tree, that that's background. Once more into the breach. Okay, let's see what that looks like now. Now I've got +4 there, so there's a little bit of haloing, but I'm not going to do +4. And in fact, what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to do much more of the shadow recovery and less of the exposure, because then the shadow recovery only affects the shadows. I could also do curve adjust, but then I got to be really careful about how I adjust the curve. Okay, so I don't know if I'm 100% happy with it yet. I'm going to go to my background so I can adjust everything at one time. Looks like the top of that tree fell out. So let's go here. No, it's just really dark. Okay. So there's another way we could refine these trees. I don't know if this is the right way for this one, but I'm going to show it to you. We'll see if it works, which is this Luma Range button up here allows me to change what tonal ranges get selected on the mask. So the mask gets drawn wherever you draw it, and this is just like another refinement on top of that. Unless you re-rasterize it, this is re-editable. You can adjust this again later. So as I drag this left-hand side down, you can see it start to limit what the mask is applying to just the hard shadows. So depending on your subject, there may be a cutoff here that you can use this very naturally to select your subject or to clean a selection up. And in this case, I think it's probably going to work pretty well, as it turns out. This is like the roll off from the selection. Let's see how that looks. It looks like I missed the top of this tree, but I did not. So let's see it without those two layers. With those two layers, yeah, I think that's a net positive. I think I'll back that one off just a little bit. Okay. So let's look at what we did. Let's see where we started and where we finished. So if I reset this, that's straight out of camera. It's a very flat image, so it's not necessarily a realistic comparison, but here's where we ended up. So let me just do one more thing. I'm going to do a clone variant. So we'll get another copy of this image. And what I can do is I can reset it, do an auto adjust on it. And I'm just going to do kind of a basic set of edits. A little bit of clarity might help on this. Okay, so that's probably as good as I can do without spending much time in shifting over to local adjustments. So with local adjustments, without local adjustments. So whether you agree with the choices I made in the edits, hopefully you see that the those masks are pretty clean. And it's relatively quick to create masks, especially with the refine and the Luma Range now. It makes it really easy to exclude and include things naturally without having a lot of weird halos and bleed effects, even if you do fairly extreme edits. So there you go.